Well, joining me now to have a further look at today's papers is political commentator with Young Voices UK, Alex Petropoulos. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, James.
Let's begin with the story on the front of the Times today. Top Tories urge Sunak to toughen up Rwanda bill. Is the PM in danger of losing control over his party on this issue?
Well, I think you could go as far as saying he already has lost control of his party over this issue because of the fact that you and I were talking about migration, which is the last thing that he wants anyone to be talking about at the moment. You know, if you look at his 5 priorities, like carve inflation, grow the economy, cut the deficit, and then at the bottom, stop the boats. When you poll people and you say, which do you care about? People really don't care about stopping the boats. And the only people who do care about stopping the boats, he's already losing those votes. So in his mind, he's wanting people to stop talking about migration, but the fact that it keeps coming up, it keeps returning as an issue, it keeps being the thorn in his side that never goes away, it shows he's pretty much lost control over what his party talks about.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. You do wonder whether one of his biggest regrets is about this time last year when he made that speech outlining his 5 pledges for 2023, and one of them, a really central plank of it, was stop the boats, because yes, we know that immigration and the illegal crossings over the Channel are a big concern for some voters, in particular voters who are more likely to vote Conservative and who they're at risk of losing to the Reform Party. But had he, for example, said reduce the number of crossings, he would be able to say, actually, we've reduced the number of crossings and we've succeeded there. But by saying stop the boats, he was almost setting an impossible target.
Yeah, and, this Rwanda bill has always been about driving attention, right? It's never been about stopping crossings. It's always just been about taking attention and sort of highlighting this as this massive issue and saying, we're going to tackle this massive issue. Because like you're saying, when you look at the numbers, crossings are down, but no one really cares about that because it's an issue that is so sort of attentive and makes people stare at and say, oh, we've got to stop the boats. It's this big, scary thing suddenly. And the way that the Rwanda bill has been framed constantly has always been in a sort of provocative manner, always trying to provoke reactions from people maybe on the more central left side of politics saying, you can't do this, this is outrageous. And it just seems to be constantly backfiring for the Prime Minister. And I think he's, like you're saying, regretting the way that things have gone.
Yeah, well, that brings us onto the front page of the Telegraph this morning. Tories facing 1997-style wipeout. They've got a YouGov poll that shows that the Conservatives would be reduced to 169 seats at the next election. Labour would be on 385, which, if my maths is correct, gives them a majority of about 120. So pretty big majority, considerably bigger than Boris Johnson won back in 2019. I mean, the question I'm asking this morning, Alex, and I'll put it to you, is if you were advising Rishi Sunak, how do you begin to reverse that? Now, maybe, given that poll, the prospect of a Conservative victory at the next election is just beyond them now. But if you're trying to reduce that gap, where do you start?
I think you have to start with acknowledging the fact that you've lost complete control over whether people listen to you. Because I think that Rishi Sunak has made a genuine effort to try and turn things around. He has made an effort to say, how do I turn this ship around? But what he's realized is that people aren't giving him a fair chance, as he'd like to say. And to that, I'd say, well, you don't really deserve a fair chance if you're starting from a rough place. And I think that there almost needs to be a slate clean and a decision to just stop talking and just put your head down and work on the things that people actually say they care about. And, I think you have to look at what Keir Starmer is saying and what people seem to be resonating with, which is he says he wants to not be a wedge in politics. He wants politics not to be about us versus them. We're going to wedge this issue. We're going to try and drive the country apart. He wants, I think he's understood that the country wants politics to be a bit less primal and a bit less me versus you and a bit more, look, we can acknowledge things kind of suck right now and here's how we're going to fix them.
I mean, it's interesting. If you look at the numbers on this poll, the Liberal Democrats are projected to win 48 seats. And obviously it's been a difficult week or so with Ed Davey with questions over his role in the post office scandal, but that would be a pretty good performance, a considerable increase on where they are now. And you would assume that most of those seats would be won in the so-called blue wall, traditional Tory seats that maybe lean more towards the centre and are maybe turned off the rightwards drift of the government. And yet, there's also a narrative that actually the Conservatives, if they're going to do well at the next election, need to protect the red wall of the Labour-facing seats who maybe are more socially conservative and more concerned about issues such as immigration. So if you're Rishi Sunak and you're thinking, well, do I focus on protecting the blue wall or do I focus on protecting the seats we won last time around in the red wall, where should you focus? Because, I mean, unless you think you can do both, but that's a very difficult balancing act.
Yeah, you're right. There's sort of this attack from both sides. The Tory vote is being attacked both from the harder right and from the centrist side. I think that you can actually solve both problems at the same time by choosing to ignore issues that people on the right care about. And what I mean by that is we keep talking about migration, like I said, we're like, oh, make migration this big issue. That then lets reform say we do it better than the Tories. And so if you stop making migration such a big issue and you start focusing on some of the issues that centrist voters care about more, you'll be able to maybe compete with them on Labour because, these more centrist voters are maybe thinking, I just want some economically sensible policies and Labour are the ones who are promising that. And then people who are suddenly concerned about migration because you're bringing it up all the time are then going to say, oh, I really care about migration. You've told me about this. Now I'm going to go vote for reform. So stop talking about migration and move the narrative of what we're talking about, what the problems with the country are, back towards the centre ground, back towards, the economic and regulatory hurdles that the country faces that the Tory party should theoretically have an upper hand in solving, and yet it's failing to do so.
Just finally, let's have a look at one more story, Alex. Page 11 of the Times this morning, there is a study by the University of Oxford into why men find slapstick comedy funnier than women. They say that the sight of Del Boy Trotter falling through a bar in Only Fools and Horses or Laurel and Hardy getting into another fine mess might be more amusing if you're male because men tend to engage with the world in, and I quote, a more superficial way than women. The research looked at how more than 3,300 adults responded to cartoons in newspapers and magazines from the past 90 years. The results showed that men tended to rate slapstick jokes, largely visual and involving some sort of unexpected incident or pratfall, more highly than women. Women favoured cartoons that had a large verbal component and were about relationships, society or politics more highly than men. What about you, Alex? Do you find slapstick funny?
I think if you consider something like Mr. Bean slapstick.
Oh, definitely.
Then,
I think that's slapstick, yes.
Yeah, I think definitely. I used to do track and field in my youth, and one of my nicknames from my teammates was Mr. Bean. So he very much feels like, he feels like a character that resonates with me quite well. I've been described as having Mr. Bean-like movements, which I choose to take as a compliment.
I would own it. Yeah. No, it is funny because I love the original Pink Panther films, and Peter Sellers was an absolute genius at comedy, full stop. But at physical comedy as well, he was particularly funny. And yet my mum, and this is only one woman I'm using as an example here, my mum can't stand Peter Sellers and can't stand those films. So maybe there is something in this study, but who knows? Alex, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
That's Alex Petropoulos there, political commentator with Young Voices UK.